He purchased a slave for one simple reason: to serve as a nanny to his motherless little daughter. But the moment he uncovered what she secretly did every single night, his entire life turned upside down. In the America of 1853, during the peak of antebellum wealth and splendor, men of the Southern elite handled their household needs by buying slaves the same way they would buy furniture. Among wealthy merchants and plantation owners, bringing in a slave nurse was a practical and widespread custom. Colonel William Harrison Beaumont felt utterly desperate to find someone who could look after his 3-year-old daughter after losing his wife during the birth of their second child. He purchased Catherine, a 25-year-old young slave, expecting nothing more than that she would keep the little girl clean and fed. Yet Catherine carried secrets that reached far beyond her assigned tasks. What started as a purely professional arrangement soon grew into something completely unexpected for both of them. When William finally discovered that every night Catherine was secretly teaching his daughter something strictly forbidden by law, something that could strip freedom from both of them, he saw a soul so remarkable that it forced the colonel to question every belief he had ever held. Once the truth about Catherine's past came into the open, that she wasn't merely an ordinary slave, but a woman whose education matched his own, the scandal that erupted rocked the very foundations of Charleston society. The love that blossomed between them challenged not only social rules, but the laws themselves. What unfolds when a powerful man realizes he has bought not just a servant, but a teacher in disguise, reveals how genuine love can bloom in the most improbable places and change lives forever. Tell me right now, from which city are you listening to this story? And get ready to discover how one small decision can alter the destiny of an entire family. Before we dive deeper into this shocking tale, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me which city you're tuning in from. Let's build our community stronger so these powerful stories are never forgotten. Thank you. Now let's continue. On a humid morning in September 1853, the Charleston slave market in South Carolina buzzed with activity when Colonel William Harrison Beaumont stepped down from his carriage, carrying a clear purpose and a heart weighed down by sorrow. At just 34 years old, he had become a widower only 4 months earlier when his beloved wife Elizabeth passed away from complications after delivering their second child, who also did not survive. William scanned the market with a blend of revulsion and weary acceptance. He had never before needed to buy slaves in person. He always left that task to the overseers on his cotton plantation upriver. But now the need was urgent. His daughter Margaret, barely 3 years old, had been crying without stop since her mother's death. She refused to eat properly and had already driven away 4 nurses with her challenging temperament. Her grief showed in tantrums, terrifying nightmares, and a stubborn rejection of comfort from anyone trying to take her mother's place. The morning air hung heavy with the harbor's scent, salt, fish, and the press of too many bodies crowded together. William's stomach churned as he watched families torn apart, children clinging desperately to their mothers, men examined like cattle. He had grown up surrounded by slavery and inherited slaves along with his father's plantation, yet he had never personally taken part in this kind of transaction. His late wife Elizabeth had always managed the household staff, and he had been happy to stay ignorant of the grim details. "I need a young woman, healthy, experienced with small children," he told the trader. A round, perspiring man named Theodore Marsh, famous across Charleston for his stock of house servants and his endless patience. "My daughter is difficult. She has suffered a terrible loss and needs someone gentle yet firm. I have precisely what your honor requires, Theodore replied, his small eyes gleaming at the thought of a big sale. He guided William to a quieter section of the market, where the more valuable merchandise was kept, separate from the field hands and dock laborers. A prime piece. Young, strong, exceptionally clean. She comes from a Virginia plantation where she looked after the master's children. Light-skinned, refined features, knows exactly how to behave in a gentleman's home. Worth every penny, I promise. Among the women seated on wooden benches, William noticed one who stood out. Not only for her striking beauty, but for her proud posture. While the others kept their gaze lowered in resignation, this woman watched everything around her with sharp, alert intelligence that instantly caught his attention. Something in her bearing hinted she had not been born into this life, though he couldn't yet pinpoint why he felt that way. Catherine was 25, with caramel-colored light brown skin, black wavy hair neatly braided over one shoulder, and hazel eyes that seemed to hold profound secrets. She wore a faded blue cotton dress, patched in places, but remarkably clean under the circumstances. William noticed her hands were delicate and well-maintained, not rough or calloused from field work or heavy chores. Her nails were neatly trimmed. When she shifted, her movements carried a graceful poise that suggested training in etiquette. "This is Catherine," Theodore announced with his practiced sales pitch. 25 years old, healthy as can be, no bad habits, wonderful with children, perfectly obedient. Trained in a fine Virginia household, knows all the proper ways, can cook if needed. But her real strength is caring for little ones. The family hit hard times and had to sell their house staff. Their misfortune becomes your gain, Colonel. William stepped closer. Catherine lifted her eyes to meet his. For a brief moment, he felt as though she could see straight into his soul. Past his fine clothes and respected name, right to the grief and desperation inside him. There was a depth in her gaze that unsettled him, an intelligence that seemed out of place for someone in her position. Slaves were supposed to be simple and uneducated, unable to observe with the piercing clarity he saw in her face. "You have experience with small children?" he asked her directly, breaking custom by speaking to her instead of the trader. "Yes, sir," Catherine answered in a soft yet steady voice that carried a cultured accent he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the heavy dialect of field slaves, nor the exaggerated imitation of house servants, copying their masters. "I have cared for many children over the years, from infancy through their early learning." William noted how she answered, not just saying yes, but adding details about the ages she had worked with. Most slaves would have given a simple yes or no. "Difficult children," he pressed. "Ones who cry a great deal, refuse to eat, children who have lost their mothers." He saw a flicker of pain cross her eyes, hinting at personal loss. "Yes, sir," she replied gently. "Children who are grieving need special care. They require patience, consistency, and someone who understands that their actions come not from defiance, but from pain trying to find its way out." Her insight was so precise, exactly what the doctor had told him about Margaret, that William's breath caught. He stared at her, trying to grasp how a slave could express what he himself had struggled to understand. "How did you know?" he asked quietly, momentarily forgetting Theodore was there. "How did you know about my daughter's situation?" "From the way you speak of her, sir," Catherine said softly, "and from the sorrow in your eyes. A man doesn't come to buy a nurse with such urgency unless his need is desperate, and that kind of desperation usually springs from love mixed with loss." Theodore shifted uneasily, clearly displeased that his merchandise was speaking so freely. Now, Catherine, just answer the gentleman's questions. No extra words, he snapped. But William raised a hand. No, let her speak. He looked at Catherine intently. You understand grief. You've seen it in children before. I have seen it in many forms, sir, in children who lost parents, in parents who lost children. Grief is grief, whether dressed in fine clothes or in rags. The simple dignity of her philosophical reply stirred something deep in William's chest. This was no ordinary slave. Whatever had brought her to this auction block, there was something truly extraordinary about her. Sensing the sale was going his way, Theodore pressed forward. As you can see, Colonel, she speaks well and understands quality care. A girl like this will fit perfectly in your home, 'cause no problems, and give your daughter exactly what she needs. How much? William asked, still looking at Catherine rather than the trader. $800. I know it sounds high, but for a trained nurse of her quality, from a proper household, it's more than fair. I could easily get 1,000 from one of the families on Trad Street, but I prefer seeing my merchandise go to good homes where they'll be appreciated. It was indeed a steep price, nearly double what a field hand would cost, far more than most house servants. But William was desperate, and something about Catherine reached him on a level he couldn't explain. Perhaps he hoped this unusual woman might succeed where others had failed. Perhaps it was pure desperation, or perhaps it was something deeper he wasn't yet ready to name. I'll pay it, he said. Have your man prepare the papers. Theodore's face broke into a wide grin. Excellent choice, Colonel. I guarantee you won't regret it. Catherine will serve you well. An hour later, William was leading Catherine to his carriage, her few belongings tied in a small cloth bundle. As they passed through the market, she kept her eyes straight ahead and her back straight, carrying herself with quiet dignity despite the humiliation all around her. William noticed how other slaves seemed to defer to her. Even in that terrible place, she commanded respect. The carriage waited on East Bay Street. His driver, James, a slave who had served the Beaumont family for 20 years, raised an eyebrow when he saw Catherine, but said nothing, only nodded respectfully as William helped her into the carriage. During the ride to the Beaumont mansion on King Street, in the fashionable district south of Broad, William explained the situation in greater detail. The carriage rolled past elegant streets, lined with palmetto trees and ornate iron gates, past the grand homes of Charleston's elite. My daughter Margaret is 3 years old, he began, watching Catherine's face. She lost her mother 4 months ago during childbirth. Elizabeth developed a fever after the delivery and did not survive. The baby, a son, lived only 2 days. His voice caught. Since then, Margaret has been inconsolable. She cries for hours, barely eats, wakes screaming from nightmares. We've tried 4 nurses. The first 2 were worn down by her constant tears. The third struck her in anger, when she wouldn't stop crying. I dismissed her immediately. The 4th left yesterday saying she couldn't take it anymore. The Catherine listened thoughtfully. The child is testing them, she said. When children lose a parent, especially their mother, they often become difficult to see if the new caregiver will abandon them too. Every time a nurse leaves, it confirms Margaret's fear that everyone she loves will disappear. William stared at her. That is exactly what Dr. Peyton told me. How do you know this? I have cared for grieving children before, sir. The patterns are the same no matter the circumstances. You mentioned earlier that the father must be considered too. What did you mean? Catherine hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Children are very sensitive to the emotions around them. If Margaret sees her father grieving, if she senses his sadness and his struggle to care for her while carrying his own pain, she may be reacting to that as much as to her mother's absence. Sometimes children act out because they don't know how else to show they see their parents suffering. Her words struck William's heart like an arrow. He had tried so hard to stay strong for Margaret, suppressing his own grief to comfort her. But the effort had left him exhausted. At night, alone in the bedroom he once shared with Elizabeth, he wept. In front of Margaret and the staff, he wore the stoic mask expected of a Southern gentleman. "You seem to understand a great deal about the human heart," he said quietly. "Where did you learn such things?" "Life teaches many things, sir," Catherine replied, turning to look out at the passing houses. "Loss is a universal teacher." They rode in silence for a few minutes before William spoke again. "You will be responsible for all of Margaret's care, feeding, bathing, dressing, playing with her, putting her to bed. Mrs. Beatrice Thornton manages the household. She has been our housekeeper for 15 years and runs a strict operation. She expects high standards from all staff. You will take meals in the servants' dining room and report any concerns about Margaret directly to Mrs. Thornton, not to me. Will I be allowed to take Margaret outside to the garden or for walks?" The question surprised him. Most slaves would wait to be told their duties. Yes, of course. Fresh air and exercise are important for children. Our garden is private and secure. And if Margaret needs something, clothing, books, toys, how should I let you know? Books, William repeated. You think she needs books? She's only 3. Children are never too young for stories, sir. Picture books help build vocabulary while they learn to speak. Again, William was surprised by her insight. I will make sure you have the proper materials for her care and education. When they arrived at the mansion, Catherine stepped out and looked up at the impressive 3-story home with its tall columns and wide piazzas. One of the finest on King Street, built of Charleston gray brick with white trim, surrounded by elegant gardens behind iron fencing. William watched her face, expecting the usual awe most slaves showed when seeing such wealth. Instead, her expression was calm and analytical, as if she were quietly assessing the household rather than being overwhelmed by it. Mrs. Beatrice Thornton waited in the entrance hall. A tall woman with iron, gray hair in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She studied Catherine with clear skepticism. This is Catherine, William said. She will care for Margaret. Please show her to the quarters we prepared, then bring Margaret to meet her. I'll be in my study if needed. Yes, sir, Mrs. Thornton replied crisply. She turned to Catherine. Follow me. As William climbed the stairs to his second-floor study, he heard Mrs. Thornton's voice echoing up the stairwell. I run a proper household here. Cleanliness, punctuality, and obedience are required at all times. The colonel is a good master, but he will not tolerate laziness or disrespect. Do you understand? Yes, Mom. Catherine answered clearly and respectfully. Never servile. William found himself hoping Mrs. Thornton's sternness would not intimidate Catherine. The housekeeper was loyal and efficient, but she ruled the staff with an iron hand and had little patience for sentiment. Catherine's room was small but comfortable for servants' quarters. A narrow bed with a simple quilt, a chest of drawers, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a single chair by the window overlooking the back garden with its roses and ancient oak tree. This is your room, Mrs. Thornton said. Keep it neat. Inspections happen every Saturday morning. Meals are served in the servants' dining room at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. You eat with the other house staff. Miss Margaret takes her meals in the nursery, and you will make sure she eats properly. Her clothes are in her wardrobe. She bathes every evening before bed. Any questions? May I ask about Miss Margaret's routine? Catherine asked. What time does she wake? When does she nap? What are her favorite foods and games? The Mrs. Thornton's expression softened slightly. She wakes early, usually by 6. She used to nap after lunch, but lately she fights sleep and cries herself to exhaustion by mid-afternoon. She picks at her food, especially vegetables. She once loved playing with dolls and looking at picture books with her mother. Since Mrs. Beaumont passed, she's shown little interest in toys. Her voice carried sadness. She was such a happy child before. Now she just seems lost. I will do everything I can to help her find her way back, Catherine said gently. See that you do. The colonel loves that child more than anything. If you ease her suffering, you will have his gratitude forever. After Mrs. Thornton left to fetch Margaret, Catherine stood alone in her room. She walked to the window, gazed at the garden, and took several deep breaths. 3 years since her kidnapping. 3 years of hiding her true self. 3 years of enduring humiliation and fear. And now she was here, in this beautiful home, entrusted with a motherless child. Perhaps, she thought, this could be where her luck finally changed. She heard small footsteps in the hall, followed by Mrs. Thornton's heavier tread. Catherine turned from the window, straightened her spine, and prepared to meet her new charge. Margaret was tiny, smaller than Catherine had expected for a 3-year-old. Blonde curly hair carefully combed, but already coming loose from its ribbons, enormous blue eyes dominating her pale face. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes from countless sleepless nights. She wore a lovely white dress with blue embroidery, but it hung loosely on her small frame. She clutched a worn rag doll tightly and held Mrs. Thornton's skirt with her other hand. Miss Margaret, Mrs. Catherine, Mrs. Thornton said, her tone much gentler. She has come to take care of you. Margaret stared at Catherine with sullen, wary eyes. Her lower lip trembled, as if she were already bracing to cry. Catherine knelt slowly to the child's level. She didn't approach or reach out. She simply smiled softly. Hello, Margaret, she said in a gentle voice. My name is Catherine. I came to be your friend. Margaret didn't answer. She pressed herself tighter against Mrs. Thornton's leg, eyes fixed on Catherine. You have very beautiful eyes, Catherine continued, keeping her voice soft and calm. They're the color of the sky on a clear summer day. I bet your mama used to tell you that. I bet she said you have the prettiest eyes she ever saw. At the mention of her mother, Margaret's face crumpled and tears poured down her cheeks. Mrs. Thornton looked alarmed and started to speak, but Catherine did something unexpected. She began to sing, very softly, a melody that seemed to come from another world. The words were in a language neither Margaret nor Mrs. Thornton recognized, something ancient and African, but the tune was achingly beautiful, filled with both longing and comfort. Margaret's sobs quieted. She loosened her grip on Mrs. Thornton's skirt and took a small step forward, eyes wide and locked on Catherine's face. The tears still fell, but silently now, as if the music had given her grief a softer way to flow. When the song ended, the room fell quiet except for Margaret's shaky breathing. Without realizing it, the child had moved several steps closer to Catherine. That was beautiful, Mrs. Thornton said quietly. I've never heard anything like it. William's voice came from the doorway. What language was that? Catherine turned, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood there, face full of wonder. An African lullaby, sir, she said, rising. My mother taught it to me when I was very small. It speaks of stars watching over children while they sleep, keeping them safe through the night. You speak African? William asked, stepping into the room. Some words and phrases, sir. My mother came from Africa originally and remembered the old songs. William looked at his daughter, who was still gazing at Catherine with rapt attention. It was the first time in weeks Margaret had shown interest in anything besides her grief. Margaret, sweetheart, he said gently, crouching beside her. Do you like Catherine's singing? Margaret nodded slowly. Would you like her to stay and take care of you? To sing to you and play with you? Another small nod. William felt a tiny spark of hope bloom in his chest. Catherine, would you mind staying with Margaret for the rest of the afternoon? I think she feels comfortable with you. Of course, sir. I would be honored. In the days that followed, William found himself watching Catherine with growing fascination. She moved through the household with quiet efficiency, her full attention on Margaret. The change in his daughter was slow but undeniable. The endless crying lessened. Margaret began eating more, still picking at her food, but enough to relieve William's worry. Night terrors persisted, but Catherine had a gift for soothing her back to sleep. Sometimes William would wake to hear that strange, beautiful African lullaby drifting through the house, and know Catherine was singing Margaret out of a nightmare. Even more remarkable, Margaret began to smile again, small, fragile smiles at first, but real. She laughed at something Catherine said over breakfast. She played with her dolls while Catherine sewed. She asked questions about the garden flowers, as Catherine walked with her among the roses. William watched these moments with relief and gratitude, but also with increasing puzzlement. Catherine was unlike any slave he had ever met. Her speech was too refined, her knowledge too wide, her manner too confident. She never crossed the boundaries of her role, always addressing him and Mrs. Thornton with perfect respect. Yet something in her bearing suggested she was playing a part rather than living her true nature. He noticed small details, the way she held a book when looking at picture books with Margaret, as if she were actually reading. The grace of her movements, more like a lady than a servant. The words she used, consistency, temperament, anxiety, words beyond what a slave would typically know. Her posture always upright, her hands always clean despite her work. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Catherine's arrival, William was working in his study when he heard voices from the garden below. He walked to the window and saw Catherine and Margaret sitting on a blanket under the oak tree. Margaret was laughing, actually laughing, a sound William had feared he would never hear again. Catherine was helping her make chains from clover flowers, their heads bent close together. You are a quick learner. Miss Margaret, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet air. See how you make the loop and thread the next stem through. That's the way. You could become a fine seamstress one day if you wanted, or you could create beautiful things simply for the joy of making them. Will you always stay with me? Margaret asked, her little voice pleading. Will you be my mama now? William's breath caught. He leaned closer to the window, desperate for Catherine's answer. I will stay with you, as long as your papa wishes me to. Catherine replied gently. I cannot be your mama, because you already have one in heaven watching over you. But I can be your friend, your teacher, and someone who loves you very much. Would that be all right? I suppose, Margaret said. But I wish you could be my mama too. Then you could never leave. People we love don't really leave us, sweetheart, Catherine said. They live in our hearts. Your mama will always be part of you. In your pretty eyes, your kind heart, and your curiosity about the world. And I promise that as long as I am with you, I will take care of you, teach you, and help you grow into the wonderful person you are meant to be. William felt tears sting his eyes. This woman, this slave whose name he barely knew, was giving his daughter something priceless. She was allowing her to grieve while offering hope for the future. She wasn't trying to replace Elizabeth. She was helping Margaret learn to live with her loss. That evening, after Margaret was asleep, William asked Mrs. Thornton about Catherine. "She is exceptional, sir," the housekeeper said. "I've never seen anyone connect with a child so quickly. Miss Margaret hasn't cried during the day in nearly a week. She eats her vegetables when Catherine tells stories about how food makes us strong. She goes to bed without a fuss. It's remarkable." "What do you know about Catherine's background? Where she came from before?" Mrs. Thornton shrugged. "Only what the trader told you, sir. From Virginia, trained in a good household. Why do you ask?" "Does she seem like other slaves to you?" The housekeeper paused, thinking. "Now that you mention it, sir, no. She speaks quite well. Better than many white women I know, honestly. And she carries herself with a dignity that's unusual. But she works hard and causes no trouble, so I have no complaints." "Have you seen her reading?" "Reading, sir?" Mrs. Thornton looked shocked. "Certainly not. That would be illegal. Why would you think that?" "Just a question," William said quickly. "She seems educated, that's all." "Well, slaves sometimes pick up refined ways from their masters. Perhaps that's it." But William knew it was more than that. Over the next several days, he paid closer attention, and what he saw only strengthened his belief that Catherine was hiding something important about her past. She knew too much about too many things. When Margaret asked about birds in the garden, Catherine named them by species and described their habits. When Margaret wondered about the stars, Catherine explained constellations with the precision of someone formally educated. She even slipped in French phrases, translating them for Margaret as naturally as if teaching a language were an everyday task. Then, 2 weeks later, William discovered the truth in a way that shook him to his core. It was a warm October evening. William was working late in his study on plantation correspondence. The house was quiet. Servants retired, Margaret long asleep. After several hours, he realized he needed a ledger from the third-floor library. As he climbed the stairs, he heard a soft voice from Margaret's room. He paused on the landing and listened. It was Catherine, but she wasn't singing or telling stories. She was speaking in a calm, instructional tone that sent ice through his veins. "This is the letter A, Margaret. It makes the sound all like an apple or A like an able. And this letter is B, which makes the sound B like in ball or book." William moved silently to Margaret's door, left slightly ajar. Through the gap he saw Catherine, sitting on the bed, Margaret nestled against her side. Between them lay a primer, a basic reading book, and Catherine was patiently teaching Margaret to recognize letters and their sounds. Teaching a slave to read was illegal across the South, punishable by fines and imprisonment. Teaching any enslaved person to read or write was seen as dangerous, a direct path to rebellion. But more shocking than the law was how expertly Catherine taught. She moved through the primer with the confidence of an experienced teacher, guiding Margaret's small finger from letter to letter, asking questions to check understanding, offering praise and encouragement. William stood frozen in the hallway, watching for perhaps 10 minutes before quietly retreating to his study. He closed the door and sat, hands trembling. He should confront her immediately. He should call the authorities. Harboring a literate slave who was teaching his daughter could destroy his reputation. Yet even as those thoughts raced through his mind, he couldn't summon the proper outrage. Instead, he felt awe and curiosity. Who was Catherine really? How had she gained such education? And what kind of extraordinary woman would risk everything to teach a 3-year-old to read? He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat thinking about everything he had noticed over the past weeks. Her refined speech, her knowledge of history, science, and languages. Her graceful posture, her skill in connecting with Margaret on a level that suggested real training in teaching. None of it matched her supposed background as a slave from Virginia. By morning, William had decided he would confront Catherine privately and demand the truth. If she had lied about her past, he needed to know, but he would listen fully before deciding what to do. He waited until afternoon when Margaret was napping. He asked Mrs. Thornton to ensure privacy and summoned Catherine to his study. She entered with her usual calm, though he thought he saw a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. She stood before his desk, hands folded, posture perfect, waiting. "Catherine," he began, deciding on directness. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need honest answers." "Yes, sir," she said steadily. "Where were you born?" "In Maryland, sir." "Which plantation?" "I was not born on a plantation, sir. I was born in Baltimore." The answer surprised him. Slaves were rarely born in cities unless their mothers served urban households. "What was your mother's name?" "Sarah Mitchell." "And your father?" Catherine paused for a moment. "James Mitchell." "They were both slaves?" "Oh, no, sir." William leaned forward, pulse racing. "What were they?" "They were free people of color, sir." The room seemed to tilt. "You're telling me you were born free?" "Yes, sir." "Then, how?" He couldn't finish. Catherine understood. "I was kidnapped, sir, 3 years ago. My parents had both died, and I lived alone in Baltimore. Men came in the night claiming my father owed them money. They destroyed my freedom papers and sold me to a trader who forged documents saying I was born a slave. I have been sold 4 times since, passed from place to place until Charleston." William felt the floor drop away. If she spoke the truth, he hadn't bought a slave at all. He had bought a free woman who had been illegally enslaved. The implications were enormous. "Can you prove any of this?" "My documents were destroyed. My house was burned. Anyone in Baltimore who knew my family would not be believed against white men with legal, though false, papers. How did you learn to read?" "My father taught me. He was a skilled carpenter, respected in the free-colored community. He believed education was essential. I can read and write in English and French. I studied mathematics, history, geography. My father wanted me to support myself, never depend on anyone." "I saw you teaching Margaret last night," William said quietly. "I saw you with the primer." Catherine's face paled. "Sir, do you know what could happen to both of us if you reported this?" "Yes. I know. I am sorry. I should not have presumed. It's just that Margaret is so bright, so eager to learn. It felt wrong to let her mind stay idle when she could be developing it. But I understand if you must punish me. I accept the consequences." She stood before him with perfect dignity, ready for whatever judgment came. In that moment, everything about her suddenly made sense. She wasn't a slave pretending to be free. She was a free person forced into slavery. And even under that weight, her true nature shone through. "Catherine," he said slowly, "if what you're telling me is true, if you were born free, then you are being held illegally. I purchased you under false pretenses." "That is correct. Sir, why didn't you say something when I first bought you? Would you have believed me? A colored woman in a slave market claiming to be free. Mr. Marsh had legal documents. False though they were, I had nothing but my word. She was right. In the South's legal and social system, a slave's word meant nothing against a white man's papers. I need time to think, William said. This is far more complex than I can handle right now. I understand, sir. May I ask what you intend to do? I don't know yet. But Catherine, he looked at her intently. I want the truth. All of it. I want to know exactly what happened to you, who you were before, how you ended up here. Can you tell me? Yes, sir. If you truly want to know, I will tell you everything. Come back tonight after Margaret is asleep. We will talk privately. Catherine nodded and left. William sat alone, thoughts churning. If her story was true, he faced a huge decision. He could ignore what he'd learned and keep her as a slave. No one would know. He could report her literacy and have her sold away. Or he could investigate her claims, and if they proved true, help her regain her freedom. That last choice would cost him $800 and take away the best caregiver Margaret had ever had. It would also be the right thing. That night, after the household settled and Margaret slept soundly, Catherine returned to his study. William had built a fire against the evening chill and arranged 2 chairs so they could speak face to face, not across the formal desk. Sit, he said, gesturing, and tell me your story, all of it. Catherine sat, took a deep breath, and began. My father, James Mitchell, was born a slave on a tobacco plantation in southern Maryland. When he was 25, his master died, and in his will manumitted several slaves, including my father. He was a talented carpenter and used his skills to build a good life. He moved to Baltimore and established himself as a craftsman, making furniture, doing construction, earning a reputation for quality and reliability. She paused, eyes distant with memory. My mother, Sarah, was born free. Her parents had bought their freedom years before she was born. She worked as a seamstress and was known for her beautiful work. My parents met at church, married, and I was born in 1828. They named me Catherine after my grandmother. You were educated from childhood? William asked. Yes, my father insisted. He said slavery had stolen his childhood and youth, and he was determined I would have every advantage. He hired a tutor for me at 5. By 10, I could read English and French, do mathematics through algebra, and knew history and geography as well as any white child in a good school. What happened to your parents? Pain crossed her face. My mother died of consumption when I was 20. My father never fully recovered. He kept working, but his heart was broken. 2 years later, in 1850, he was killed in an accident at a construction site. A wall collapsed and crushed him. I'm sorry, William said sincerely. He left me the house we lived in, his tools, some savings. It wasn't a fortune, but enough to live modestly. I supported myself with needlework and teaching reading and writing to children in the free colored community. I had a small but good life. I wasn't wealthy, but I was free and independent. That was everything. What happened 3 years ago? 2 men came to my door one night in August. They said my father owed them money. Gambling debts, they claimed. I told them it was impossible. My father didn't gamble. They insisted I would work off his debts. When I refused and showed them his papers proving no debts existed, they became violent. They beat me, tied me up, and burned my house to the ground. Everything, my father's papers, my freedom certificate, my mother's Bible, all destroyed. Her voice stayed steady, but William saw the pain in her eyes. They kept me locked in a cellar for weeks while they arranged false papers saying I was born a slave, named Catherine with no surname, born in 1828 in Virginia. They sold me to a trader who took me south. I tried telling the truth at first, but no one listened. A colored woman's word meant nothing against white men with legal documents. I was beaten for lying, beaten for trying to escape, beaten for being difficult. Eventually, I learned to stay silent and wait for an opportunity. But you never stopped being who you were. William observed. No. They could take my freedom, but they could not take my mind, my education, or my sense of self. I hid it as best I could, spoke simply, kept my eyes down, acted the part they expected. But inside, I was still Catherine Mitchell, daughter of James and Sarah, a free woman of Baltimore. I just couldn't prove it to anyone. William leaned back, trying to imagine what she had endured 3 years of forced servitude, hiding her true self, living in constant fear. Yet she had kept her dignity and core identity. "Why did you teach Margaret to read?" he asked. "You must have known it was dangerous." "Because she is so bright, and because education is the one thing no one can take from her. If I've learned anything from my life, it's that circumstances can change in an instant. Wealth can vanish. Freedom can be stolen. Security is an illusion. But knowledge, once gained, remains. I wanted to give Margaret something that would be hers no matter what the future brings." She hesitated. And because it gave me joy to teach again, to use my mind and skills for their true purpose. For those few minutes each night teaching Margaret her letters, I was not a slave. I was a teacher. The person my parents raised me to be. It was a small rebellion, perhaps, but it mattered to me. William stood and walked to the window, gazing at the dark garden. He stood there a long moment, weighing his options and responsibilities. "Catherine," he said finally, turning to her, "I am going to investigate your story. I will write to people in Baltimore, search records, find any evidence that supports what you've told me. If your story proves true, I will help you recover your freedom. You have my word." Tears sprang to her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. "Do you mean that, sir?" "I do. I cannot undo the injustice done to you, but I can refuse to continue it. If you were born free, then you should be freed." "Thank you," she whispered. "You cannot know what that means to me. In the meantime, you will continue caring for Margaret, and you will continue teaching her to read, but discreetly. If anyone asks, you're simply looking at picture books with her. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Catherine, I need to ask one more thing. When you are free, what will you do? Where will you go?" She looked at him with those clear hazel eyes. "I don't know, sir. I have no family left, no home to return to. Baltimore holds only painful memories now. I suppose I'll find a way to support myself, perhaps return to teaching or needlework." "And Margaret, what about her?" Pain crossed Catherine's face. "I will miss her terribly. She has become like a daughter to me. But I cannot ask you to keep me as an employee once I regain my freedom. The social complications would be—" She trailed off. "Would you want to stay if it were possible?" "More than anything. But, sir, surely you see how impossible that would be. A free woman of color working in your household. The scandal it would cause. And Margaret's future to consider. She needs to grow up as part of Charleston society, not as the daughter of a man who employs a colored woman in his home." "Let me worry about society," William said. "You worry about Margaret. She loves you, Catherine. Losing you would devastate her after everything she's already lost. Oh. And I love her. But love does not always determine what is possible." William wanted to say more, to confess that his feelings for her had grown far beyond gratitude and respect. But it was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous. Instead, he simply nodded. "Get some rest. We'll speak more after I've had time to investigate your claims." Over the next 6 weeks, William poured time and resources into verifying Catherine's story. He wrote to officials in Baltimore, to churches that kept records of free colored people, to carpenters' guilds that might have known James Mitchell. He hired a private investigator to search records and interview people in Baltimore's free colored community. The replies came slowly, but they came. Yes, James Mitchell had been a respected carpenter in Baltimore. Yes, he had been a freed slave who built a successful business. Yes, he had married Sarah Washington in 1825, and they had a daughter named Catherine born in 1828. Yes, his house had burned in August 1850 shortly after his death, assumed at the time to be an accident. And yes, his daughter Catherine had disappeared around the same time and was presumed to have perished in the fire. When William sat down with all the documentation spread before him, he knew without doubt that Catherine had told the truth. She was a free woman, illegally enslaved, and he had unknowingly purchased stolen property. The legal situation was complicated. Simply freeing Catherine would not restore her status as a free-born woman. She needed proper documentation, proof of her birth status, legal recognition of the fraud committed against her. William consulted a lawyer known for progressive views, swearing him to secrecy. "It can be done," the lawyer said, "but it will take time and money. We'll need to file documents in Maryland courts, obtain testimony from people who knew her family, prove the slave papers are fraudulent. It could take months, perhaps a year." "Do it," William said, "whatever it takes." While the legal process moved forward, life in the Beaumont household continued. Margaret thrived under Catherine's care, growing stronger and happier each week. Her grief hadn't vanished, but it had become manageable, woven into her life rather than overwhelming it. She spoke often of her mother now, asking Catherine about heaven and angels, working through her understanding of death with Catherine's patient explanations. And every night, Catherine taught Margaret to read. By November, the child recognized all her letters. By December, she sounded out simple words. By January, she read basic sentences from her primer. It was remarkable progress for such a young child. Proof of both Margaret's intelligence and Catherine's skill as a teacher. William found himself increasingly drawn to Catherine's company. He began finding excuses to observe her lessons with Margaret, sitting quietly in the nursery corner while she taught. Their conversations about Margaret's development naturally expanded into discussions of education, philosophy, literature, politics. He discovered she was as knowledgeable and thoughtful as any educated person he knew, with opinions on everything from Wordsworth's poetry to the political situation in Europe. Around Christmas, he realized he was falling in love with her. It wasn't only her beauty, though she was beautiful, or her intelligence, though she was brilliant. It was her entire being. The strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardship, the kindness she showed his daughter, the quiet dignity she maintained even in the degrading position slavery forced upon her. But he said nothing. The social barriers between them were immense. Even when she became legally free, she would still be a woman of color in the slaveholding South, and he a white man of the planter class. A romantic relationship would be scandalous, potentially dangerous for both, and certainly damaging to Margaret's future in Charleston society. So he remained silent, watching, waiting, wondering if the feelings he saw in Catherine's eyes when she looked at him were real or simply his own wishful thinking. In March 1854, 6 months after Catherine arrived, the legal documents finally arrived. Catherine Mitchell, freeborn woman of color, had been officially recognized by Maryland courts as having been illegally enslaved. The fraudulent papers were nullified. Her freedom was restored. William arranged a small ceremony at the Charleston courthouse with his lawyer and Mrs. Thornton as witnesses. Catherine stood before the judge and received her freedom papers, legal documents proving beyond doubt that she was a free woman. When she walked out of that courthouse, she belonged to herself alone. That evening, William asked to speak with her privately in his study. She came in a simple but clean dress Mrs. Thornton had given her, clutching her freedom papers as if they might vanish if she let go.
"How do you feel?"
William asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "For 3 years I dreamed of this moment. Now that it's here, I realize I have no idea what to do next." "You could stay," William said. "Not as a slave, obviously, but as Margaret's governess. I would pay you a salary, provide good quarters, respect your free status. You could continue teaching Margaret and live here in safety and comfort." Why would you do that?" Catherine asked softly. "You know the scandal it would cause to employ a free woman of color in your household." "Because Margaret needs you. Because—" He hesitated, then chose honesty. "Because I have come to value your presence in this house. In my life, more than I can easily express. Because the thought of you leaving is unbearable." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. "William," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I need to be honest with you. I have developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude. When I'm near you, my heart races. When you speak, I hang on every word. I think about you constantly, but feelings don't change reality. Even if I stay as an employee, society will judge us harshly. And if we ever acted on these feelings, the consequences would be severe." "I know," William said. "I've thought of little else for months. The social barriers are real and significant. But Catherine, I am in love with you. Completely, hopelessly in love, and I think you love me too." "I do," she whispered. "God help me, I do. But love is not enough." "What if we made it enough? What if we decided our happiness matters more than social approval?" "And Margaret? What about her future? If you marry a colored woman, her prospects in Charleston society will be destroyed. She will be ostracized, mocked, made to suffer for your choice." William had thought about this deeply. "Or she will learn that love and justice matter more than prejudice. She will grow up in a household that values character over skin color, education over empty social pretensions. She will be stronger for it." "You are asking me to be brave enough to marry you," Catherine said. "But are you brave enough to face what that will mean? The loss of friends, destroyed business partnerships, ruined social standing. I would rather be ruined with you than respected without you." Catherine closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "This is madness. This is impossible." "Then let us be mad and impossible together." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "If we do this, there is no going back. Once you marry me, Charleston society will never accept you again. Then we will find new society. There are progressive communities in the North, places where an interracial couple might live in relative peace. We could move, start fresh somewhere Margaret could grow up without the poison of slavery all around her. You would give up your plantation, your heritage, everything you know. I would give up anything for you and Margaret. You have both become my whole world." Catherine moved toward him, closing the distance. She reached up and touched his face gently. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Not because it makes sense or because it is easy, but because I love you and because life is too short to deny love when we find it." William pulled her into his arms and kissed her. In that moment, the impossible became real. They married quietly 3 months later, in June 1854, in a small ceremony performed by an abolitionist minister in a private home. Margaret, now 4, was overjoyed to have Catherine officially become her new mother. Mrs. Thornton stood as witness, having grown to love Catherine like a daughter and admiring William's courage in following his heart. Charleston society reacted swiftly and brutally. Friends cut contact. Business partners withdrew from deals. Social invitations stopped. William's name was removed from club lists. Newspapers ran editorials condemning him. Sermons preached against the degradation of interracial marriage. Anonymous threats arrived at their door. But there were also unexpected allies. Some progressive families with abolitionist sympathies reached out in support. A few business contacts proved more loyal than William had hoped. Slowly, carefully, they began building a new life that did not depend on Charleston's approval. True to his word, William eventually sold his plantation and moved his family north to Philadelphia, where laws against interracial marriage were not enforced and a free woman of color married to a white man could live without constant fear. There, Margaret grew into a confident, educated young woman, fluent in 3 languages, passionate about social justice, unafraid to challenge injustice wherever she found it. Years later, when Margaret was grown and married to a progressive young lawyer who shared her values, she would tell people about her unusual family. "My father bought a slave to care for me after my mother died. But he discovered he had bought not a servant, but a teacher. Not property, but a person of extraordinary gifts. And he had the courage to admit his error, correct the injustice, and follow his heart even when society condemned him for it. My mother lost her freedom to cruelty and greed, but she never lost herself. Together, my parents built a family based on love and respect rather than law and custom. They taught me that human dignity matters more than social approval, that love sees beyond color, and that courage means doing what is right, even when it costs you everything." Catherine and William's story became one people told when they needed to believe that love could triumph over prejudice, that individuals could stand against unjust systems, and that families built on genuine affection were stronger than those built on social convention. On quiet evenings when the house was still and Margaret slept, Catherine would sometimes take out her freedom papers and read them, still hardly believing they were real. William would watch her, marveling that this extraordinary woman had entered his life in such an unlikely way. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her once. "The difficulties we've faced, the losses we've endured." Catherine looked at him with those clear hazel eyes that had first captivated him in a Charleston slave market years before. "I regret the injustice that brought us together," she said. "I regret the years I lost to slavery. But I do not regret loving you, or this family we have built, or the life we have made despite everything working against us. What we have is worth every struggle." And in the end, that was the truth that sustained them through every difficulty, every challenge, every moment. When society's disapproval threatened to crush them, they had found something rare and precious, a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to stand together against a world that insisted they remain apart. Years later, when historians looked back at the antebellum period, they would find countless stories of slavery's cruelty and injustice, but they would also find occasional stories like Catherine and William's. Stories that proved even in the darkest times, individuals could choose humanity over hate, Love over law, justice over convenience. These stories mattered not because they were common, but because they showed what was possible when people had the courage to live by their deepest values rather than society's shallowest prejudices. And so Catherine Mitchell Beaumont, born free, stolen into slavery, and freed again by love and justice, lived to see the end of slavery in America. She lived to see her daughter become a leader in the women's suffrage movement. She lived to teach hundreds of children, both black and white, in the school she founded in Philadelphia. And she lived to grow old beside the man brave enough to see her humanity when the law called her property, and to choose love when society demanded he choose status instead. Their story reminds us that freedom is not merely a legal status, it is a state of being. That love can flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, and that the courage to do what is right, even at great personal cost, is the foundation of all true progress. In a world that tried to reduce Catherine to property and William to his social position, they chose instead to be fully human, fully themselves, and fully committed to building a life based on their deepest values. And that choice, made in a moment of courage in 1854 Charleston, echoed forward through generations, touching everyone who heard their story and dared to believe they too could choose love over fear, justice over convenience, and hope over despair. Now tell me's from which city are you hearing this story today? And which part touched your heart the most? What moves you deepest about stories where people fight against injustice for the sake of love? Leave your like if this story of William and Catherine reached your soul, and subscribe for more stories that show how true love can transform lives and entire societies. Because we all deserve to believe that our humanity is worth far more than any label society tries to place on us. There you go. Same powerful story, same emotional punch, same call to action energy, just gently rephrased with fresh word order and flow so it feels new while staying 100% yours. Ready for your next video? Let me know.